What's up, fellow gamers? Phreak here, and it's League of Legends patch 12.3 time. I'm excited about this patch because I always love moderate size systems changes. I think it's a pretty exciting patch overall. There's a champion mid-scope rework going on. I think this is all pretty neat stuff, so let's talk about what's in the patch itself. First up, yes, a bunch of nerfs. Akshan for super high elo, Amumu for low elo, Caitlyn for pro play, Corki for pro play, LeBlanc for pro play, Senna for everywhere entirely, Zeri for everywhere entirely, and TF for pro play. So they are hitting 3 of the top 4 mids in pro. Also buffs to Lillia, who I enjoy very much. I think she's a great champion, one of my favorites, and buffs to Quinn, who has just slowly fallen off over the course of time, so good thing there. As I said, mid-scope rework to Ahri, some very small changes to Nami, which I think will end up being nerfs overall, but whatever, she's a bit too strong, and Brand getting a very small update as well. And then the thing that I care about the most, which is the systems updates to fighter items. I think that's going to be really exciting. There's some cool changes that are also going to affect non-fighters as well, so let's get into it. First up, the mid-scope Ahri rework. All right, so she is less tanky. Health growth down by 10, base health down by 26. So going from 526 to 2000, it's now going to be 500 to 1894. There's a pretty big loss in durability. She's also losing 3 armor, so that's another loss in durability, and she's losing some base health regen. So wow, that's a lot of stats lost. So here's her overall durability before and after. So this basically, consider this to be, this is obviously her total health. This is her durability against magic damage. Since her MR didn't change, we can simply plug and play her health, and that's going to be her actual durability difference. So, you know, less screwed in the early game, more screwed later. Of course, if you go over something like an Everfrost or a Crown, or you get a Demonic Embrace, any other kind of these health items, you know, you kind of assuage these fears a little bit, but certainly pretty meaningfully squishier. And then this is doing the math with her armor involved as well. It front loads the durability loss a little bit more, and overall means that, okay, she's now even weaker against physical damage matchups. I didn't spot check if she's weak to AD or weak to magic, but I did note that in current play right now, this is across 12.2 in all ranked games. This was snapshotted yesterday or the day before. I did the rundown across 2 days. So this is like pretty much all of 12.2 data and across all ranks. She's relatively balanced, a little bit early game skewed, but not heavily so. And that's what's going on with her like burst durability, okay? Right, so this is how much she's down. Then we do it with the health regen as well. Keep in mind she lost some baseline health regen. This is health per minute restored just from base health regen. Obviously, again, really down in the early game. This is the same math, but against her armor, right? So again, if she's against, you know, let's say a Victor who's spamming E on her, she's got, you know, 45% of the regen that she used to at level 1. Against someone like maybe Zed or Talon, she's got 44% of the regen because that damage goes through armor, and then that's what gets regen, right? So it does, in fact, dip into armor as well, so that's how that one works. Okay, so wow, she's been heavily nerfed. What's going on? What's next for us? Well, she's got a new passive, so Essence Theft now gives you healing eventually on killing minions or monsters. So you consume 9 kills to gain 400 to 120 plus 25% AP health. But then also you gain healing in combat. So whenever you get to take down an enemy champion, you get bam right there. Now it is within 3 seconds of damaging them, so it's more like the Katarina resets and not just the assist timer thing. That's increased to 80 to 200 and a bigger AP ratio. So how's that Marth work out? Because her old passive was any given spell could hit up to 3 targets and give you 3 stacks. Then you cast a second spell, give you 3 stacks. You cast a third spell, give you 3 stacks. Then your next spell would heal you for every minion hit. So this, I believe, if I did the math correctly, yeah, this is the baseline healing hitting 6 targets. So it's right, I cast Q on the wave, I cast W on the wave, I cast Q on the wave, and then I Q the entire wave. So it's 4 spell casts, but, you know, if you're spamming your mana, you can get it every, I would say, probably 2 waves. Seems kind of reasonable, right? Get to 9 stacks, then cast a spell, get to 9 stacks, cast a spell. Now, every 2 waves is every, you know, 12 to 13 minions, assuming you last hit well. This is every 9 minions, right? So it is arguably just definitively stronger in the other game, assuming you can, in the early game, assuming you can last hit well. Now, obviously, we're all human. We don't always get perfect CS, but if you do last hit well, it's more healing. Now, what I kind of like about this is Ahri has had, right, an early game skew for a while, as far as I can recall, and she's had really high win rates before. There's been times where it's really been she's like a 53% win rate mid laner, and an early game skew, and people still don't think she's pro viable. So I kind of like the idea of, in this sort of mid-scope update, trying to add more if you're good, this champion's better levers, such as last hitting is, directly more health gained than before. And again, it's also pretty early game focus. Obviously, the base health and the base health regen and the base armor, those are all early game focus nerfs, but this is an early game focus buff. I'm assuming this scales linearly. The old one was at breakpoints. It was like 1, 4, 8, 12, 17, something like that. Something like this. I forget. I mean, you can kind of see when the numbers really jump up. But point is, that's when the numbers came in before. Okay, so this is the heal of, a whole passive before and a whole passive after, assuming some kind of baseline math for AP being gained. Theoretically worse later, but keep in mind, again, getting 4 spells off versus clearing 2 waves. Maybe, the frequency is up in the late game. All right, on to the champion heal one. Again, this is just copy and pasted from the first column here. These are the same numbers, but the champion heal is really, really, really high. So the big thing is she's going to essentially reset in team fights, and more on that later. But she's going to gain, in the mid game, 200 health per takedown, which is pretty meaningful. Like that's more than Triumph in a lot of cases. So she's kind of getting free Triumph, which seems pretty good. And yeah, seems pretty reasonable right there. Next up, a change to Q. Q is got a slightly higher AP ratio, but also a slightly higher mana cost with rank. So, okay, fair enough. Here is Q damage before and after. Keep in mind, the base damage is the same. It's only the AP ratio going up. Worth noting that we are now in real mage territory for ability power, one of the things that I believe to be true. So certainly early game is a pro-skewed stat. However, if your champion does have late game scaling, my belief is that if you scale off gold more than ability ranks, you are more pro-skewed. That, right, you can find numbers where Ahri has a decent level 1 and a decent level 18, and you can invent ways to get there. Whatever. It could be base stats, it could be AP ratios, it could be who knows what, right? Ability ranks, who knows. But if it's really about, right, if gold scaling is a lot of it, that's going to be pro skewed because pros earn gold better, right? Everyone can sit in a lane and soak XP from minions. That's not hard. But pros last hit minions better and earn more gold, right? There's a reason that, 7 CS per minute is like generic diamond to masters solo queue. And then we look at pros and it's like, oh, Doimpi is 14. I mean, yeah, he's poaching Raptors the whole time, but gold scaling, right? So the AP ratio for the Q to double the damage, going from 400 required AP to 311 required AP, which is a buff to the AP ratio because it was a buff to the AP ratio. 311 is now in the realm of normalcy. It is a little bit aggressive, but is the realm of normalcy for a mage scaling. So it's worth noting that Ahri's old Q didn't have a very good AP ratio attached to it. Worth noting, that was maybe one of the small things that kind of kept her slightly down in pro play. But, some moderate damage increase. And to kind of remember, keep in your mind, this is to the tune of 5 to 13% in a lot of cases for this game. Obviously, the mana cost gets worse for most of the game, so okay, a bit of a nerf there. Next up, Foxfire. Foxfire gains, looks like 20 flat damage. Mana cost is down. Flames aren't on you for as long. The haste is a bit longer. The missile targeting and last hitting logic is supposedly going to be better. So a strict buff to the ability, right? Mana cost is down. You move speed faster. Keeping the flames up, I don't think is important. I'm pretty sure letting it drop gets you the cooldown faster. I could be wrong. Some abilities do count cooldown as soon as you press the button, but whatever. Either way, 20 flat damage is obviously quite nice. Now, the unfortunate thing is this is now a pretty weak AP ratio. 500 AP to double the damage of the ability is a lot. Used to be 460. Now it's 530. If anything, I would have preferred that REW got an AP ratio buff and not a base damage buff, because I think this is actually in the realm of really, really, really poor. There is an argument that we actually see this, demonic bruiser build because, well, you can't really scale your W that well anyway, and you're going to get R reset, so just stay alive in team fights. And unfortunately, there are being a lot of levers added that are influencing a push toward bruiser Ahri, like we were seeing with Akali, where her current build, her best build is Chemtank demonic into Sterix. And in that case, Akali doesn't have bad AP ratios, but Akali wants to play a long duration fight, and it's easy to play a long duration fight if you're tankier. It's kind of the same thing with Zeri here. I don't think Zeri's scaling is very bad. She doesn't have really poor crit scaling or anything. Those are all pretty reasonable, but Zeri infinitely stacks her ultimate and wants to keep casting spells forever. And so it turns out she likes living a long time, and so bruiser builds are good. This is the kind of thing I worry about, and it's part of why AP ratios are an important part of League of Legends, because otherwise you just build bruiser, right? You just build tanky. So there's a concern here. There's a concern. Doesn't mean I'm right. but it is a possible concern. Either way, again, the damage on W is up to the tune of 40 to 9% more damage. Keep that number in mind again for you. And again, she moves faster, the mana cost is lower, all that's pretty positive. Then we go to Charm. And so Charm also gained 20 damage and a 20% AP ratio bump, which is really, really big. That is a very substantial bump in AP ratio. Mana cost is down by 20 as well. So mana cost in E is down, mana cost in W is down, mana cost in Q went up. So she is worse at wave clear to a certain degree, but everything else is a lot more usable, and the damage has strictly got better, and the mana cost strictly got better as well on those abilities. So W and E are clearly much more powerful parts of her kit. But again, the idea of ranking up Charm didn't get any better. It's still 30 points of rank. There's no extra cooldown change or anything. I think it does have a cooldown rank up, but it's very, very slight. It's like half a second per rank, so it's not that big of a deal. But theoretically, that would shift your logic a little bit. Whereas W didn't get that, so arguably, there's maybe a chance it's E second. I doubt that, but it's a possibility. Anyway, Ahri's abilities no longer deal bonus damage to enemies hit by Charm. It's worth noting that that this affected the Charm damage itself. So I'm going to pause and fix these numbers. And we are back. So this is now fixed. The Charm did self-amplify, so worth noting that even after the changes, right, even after losing the 20% damage amp, she still does more damage with the new version of the ability. So Charm is obviously doing more damage to the tune of 13 to 6%. And, some cases when you're just relying on the AP ratio, maybe 19%, because the AP ratio is the biggest part of the buff. But again, we lost a, 20% damage amp, right? We lost a 20% damage amp. So Charm's doing a lot more damage, and, pretty meaningfully so. In some cases, 30 more damage is not bad. But W only sometimes does 20% more damage. And Q almost never deals 20% more damage. So in cases where you land Charm, she's probably dealing overall less damage. That's somewhat debatable, right? But I would argue yes. In cases where she doesn't land Charm, she's just strictly stronger, which I would say ups her reliability, right? Makes her less reliant on landing a Charm skill shot. So, of note there. Also worth noting just the general AP ratio on the ability. The old AP ratio was 450 to double the damage. Now it's a solid 300. I believe that number is accurate. But yeah, 300 AP to double the damage of the ability is a very aggressive AP ratio. So Q is an aggressive ratio, E is an aggressive ratio, and W is a very unaggressive ratio. Does it really matter? Not really, but it just means that W is less and less of her power budget as time goes on, which may be intentional to make her more skill shot reliant later. There's honestly some decent logic there, but just kind of bringing up what's going on with the champion. Okay. And the final change to Ahri is Spirit Rush. Has an initial duration of up to 15 seconds now instead of 10. And if you get your 3-second takedown notice and you heal for 80 to 200, you also get a new charge of Spirit Rush. Now, you can't cast it once, get 3 kills, and go up to 6, or 5, whatever. You are still capped at 3 stored. But you get your 10 seconds duration back if you ever burned it lower, and so she gets to play longer duration team fights. And this is really exciting. I think this is like the really cool part of the Ahri update, is that she's going to be a much more interesting team fighter by getting to dash, realistically, up to 8 times, right? I dash in once, land a charm, get a kill, dash in again, get a kill, dash again, right? Like, that's really neat. I think it's really interesting. My expectation is that these should overall be buffs to the champion. Damage overall is pretty close across QW and E. Maybe a little bit better since you don't land Charm reliably. Everything is better if you don't land Charm, and then obviously Charm itself is better if you do land Charm. Duh, I guess. So that can make it for some of the differences. So this is probably overall more damage to the champion, is my expectation in a lot of cases. Of course, R's damage didn't change at all, so that's going to lose out. It's 20% more damage from Charm, so that's a consideration as well. But you probably get more than 20% more Spirit Rushes. So in that case, you do get more damage at a Spirit Rush. So again, hard for me to say this is actually a weaker champion overall. Yes, her base health, base armor, and base health regen all went down. Those are certainly relevant, and counterbalances the fact that these abilities are stronger, but I think it's really neat. I think it's really cool, and I'm a big fan of the changes. So looks like a really fun champion, and looking forward to playing her with the update. VFX and SFX updates, cool stuff. All right, next up is Akshan. Akshan's been doing really well. He is early game skewed. He is very popular mid and top, especially in really high MMRs. So Akshan is getting early game focus nerfs, and from what I can recall, actually, so this is all elos, top and mid lane, 50.6, 51.5. My understanding is he is nerfed for the D2 plus bracket, that he is really taking over in ultra high elo. He's pretty skill testing. As you can see, he is quite early game skewed. Because mid lane is the majority of his games, this is just the mid lane win rate decay, 56% at unanimous surrender, down to 50% in the late game. Clearly a very strong champion, clearly very early game skewed, and I believe a much bigger problem in high elo. So yeah, doing quite well. So here is how much flat move speed he gains from canceling the second shot, which is going down by 15 to 0. And here's how much the 3-stack sort of proc bonus damage is. It's down by a flat 10. And so here's the numbers. Nothing really fancy here. Just, hey, the numbers are lower. Okay, kind of moving on. Nothing a lot to say here, right? It's an early game nerf. It's a 1% expected win rate nerf. Move on. Next up is Amumu. Amumu is once again doing too well in really low elo, as tends to be true for Amumu. And so they work out the toolbox and they say, okay, well, can we nerf his scaling from base stats, because that tends to be low elo skewed. And so 0.5 armor growth off the table, as well as the maximum passive damage reduction could be only 50%. Now, this means that he doesn't fully tank Zeri rapid fire. It's worth noting, though, that this basically doesn't affect his jungle clear in any way. Someone ran the math, and I looked at it real quick, and it was something to the tune of like several hundred armor for this to matter against small raptors. So it's basically irrelevant for this. For like jungle clear and safety, this is truly not going to matter, assuming that what I read was correct and it wasn't either miswritten or I didn't misread it or misunderstand, which is certainly possible. I am human. I'm going to make mistakes. But yeah, probably going to be pretty reasonable here. So by getting 0.5 less armor growth, this is a, by the way, late game skewed champion. Again, fueling the fact that, hey, he is a lower elo solo queue based champion. And considering that people in pro will never build him AP, his gold scaling isn't going to be that great. It's another reason why like Rammus isn't going to be seen in pro, because Rammus is also late game skewed. But anyway, yeah, we can see that, okay, Amumu has less armor growth. His health growth is also very low. It's like 80 or something. So I don't know how they do more to fix late game skew, but that's still currently happening with him. I think a lot of it is that all of his abilities are worth making up. Yeah, I don't know. It's going to be tough to fix at some point in time. I don't know what they're supposed to do about this. Anyway, let's move on to the next bit, which is Brand getting some quality of life. The passive refund now occurs if Brand's ability last hits it. And it was not already blazed, so if your W just one-shots casters, bam, here's some mana. I did not look at mid lane versus support win rate. That said, my understanding is Brand is a passive mid laner, but he scales down with MMR pretty aggressively, so he's solid in like gold minus, and then not great in plat, and pretty bad in diamond, and pretty much unplayable in masters plus. That's my understanding of Brand as far as a mid laner is concerned, but that said, again, for most people, he is a totally playable champion. I understand people don't necessarily want to, but he is totally playable. R now does a bit more to prioritize nearby enemies before bouncing back to Brand. Prioritizes enemy champions, but now basically goes to early close range minions before choosing him as a bouncer. So, small buff there. Brand, I believe, is, a totally passable support. So this could be enough to really make people play a bit more Brand support, and that could be really strong. Next up is Caitlyn. Caitlyn is overtaking pro play quite a bit. And so I had suggested, and I think it's reasonable to say no to the suggestion, but I'm just going to bring it up because I brought it up, and it was shot down, I think reasonably so, is that, so Caitlyn has among the highest base AD in the game for a marksman. I believe she sits at 62. Actually, it's right there at 62, which is higher than Ezreal, higher than Ashe, higher than, I forget, I think I checked like one other champion, but essentially she has like among the highest base AD in the game, which slightly contributes to her early game power skew. She's very, very early game skewed as far as power is concerned. And she kind of falls off as late game goes on, because of course it is. She's not a 56% win rate champion. She's an early game lane bully who then is much more balanced later on in time. Now, what's interesting is Riot's taking the approach of nerfing late game even more by lowering her AD growth by a little bit. And then I like this one a lot, though, is the Q change. She has much less wave clear, which actually does a lot to nerf her early game, to nerf her shoving power, and this should be pretty meaningful overall. So here is Caitlyn. In all ranks, she is a 59.6% win rate champion. As you can see, the win rate graph is early game skewed, 53% in surrenders, 52% in sub 25, and then, under 50 from there. So here's her total AD before and after. This is not counting generic expected attack damage buys, which, maybe should be for a more real world consideration, but just, hey, by the way, she's down about 7 attack damage late game, which is a moderate nerf to her DPS. And then as far as this is concerned, this is her pass-through Q damage. I believe this is accounting for expected attack damage purchases, and of course accounting for her total AD, accounting for ability rank, and also accounting for this nerf. So that's why we're not seeing it exactly, 16.6% damage drop. We're seeing eventually an 18% damage drop because 7 AD matters a little bit. So yeah, there's a change there. Certainly some less wave clear to the backline minions, so she doesn't, one-shot cast it quite as quickly, doesn't shove the wave quite as quickly, and that can certainly matter. Next up is Corki with a good change. He's been overtaking Pro, of course, quite a bit. The first package now comes in after Rift Herald spawns, so if you want to go ahead and rush Rift Herald down and kill it by 9:30, no problem. You don't have to play around package. That's actually going to be a pretty big deal. This will probably do a lot to affect Pro play. Package restocks every 5 minutes. That's also going to be a pretty big deal because dragons respawn every 5 minutes. So ultimately, if you're going to say, okay, dragon has spawned, we're going to go fight for it. We burn package, bam, we're ready to go. We dive in, we start the fight. Okay, knock people around, get the burn, get the team fight, get the dragon. We did it. Okay, great. You can do that at T-30, come back on the map, be ready for the next one. Now you have to say, okay, well, we fought over dragon. Now I have to recall after dragon spawns, grab the package, and then go, right? And so that's going to be pretty tough to do. So that's definitely going to be a big deal for any really objective-focused game where it's not up in time for Herald. It's not going to be up for the next dragon fight really on time if you want to use it at kind of a more aggressive timing. So this is actually pretty meaningful. And yeah, this will do a lot to affect Corki's pro priority. For like all of last year, I and also like pretty much all of the live balance designers were certain that Pro was just overlooking Corki 24/7. They're like, there's no way this man has a 54% win rate and isn't getting played in Pro right now. Like, there's no way. This champion's way too strong, and he's been a Pro champ before. Like, we're just waiting for pros to actually pick up Corki for like actually a year. Like, no cap for a year. Like all of us, and I hang out with people, so I'm saying us, though I don't make any choices here. Like, we're just like, at some point they must pick Corki. It took them a year. It took them this idea of playing a Luden's Tempest build to finally go, okay, now's the time we play Corki every game. And it's like, we've been waiting. Welcome. Corki's good. We've been waiting. And so finally, they finally are allowed to nerf Corki. They've been waiting for so long to nerf Corki because they knew he was going to get nerfed at some point, but they were waiting until Pro caught on, and here we are. So, good job. It finally happened. It only took you guys a year, Pro play. You're all professional players. Good job. Only took you a year. Imagine all the elo you could have gained. Imagine qualifying for Worlds by picking Corki. Couldn't be you. All right. LeBlanc, too good. Has been taking over Pro Play as well. Her and TF will be on the list for this one. 0 to 20 damage off distortion. That's it pretty much. Nothing too major here. Once again, early game skew champion. Lo and behold, are we surprised? No. LeBlanc has a really crushing laning phase off of WMAX, and then kind of plateaus for the rest of the mid game. She's just kind of chilling. But the fact that she has really reliable poke, right? W forward, QR, hope you land E, W back, like that's really reliable, hard to play around. It turns out like reliability is a big thing for pro play, so there we are. So early game power, reliability in the late game, yep. That's a kit made in heaven for professional play. So what are we looking at here? Well, 0 to 20 damage off the ability. Great, we did it. 20 flat damage. Nothing too scary here. Moving on. Lillia, again, is a champion that I like very much. I think she's actually quite strong. She is a late game scaling jungler now. She was, I believe, early game, and then with the big rework, she became a late game kind of focused champion. But essentially, they're just adding half a second to her sleep duration at all ranks. Worth noting that if you had a decent amount of tenacity, you could not hit confirm sleep W. If you waited until the sleep definitely landed, instead of like pre-catching, like they're gonna fall asleep, I'll start W early. But like if you waited till you hit confirmed and the sleep like actually took effect, with enough tenacity, someone could actually like flash out of your W, and you can kind of bait yourself. So by being a full 2 seconds, it's going to be much less likely to happen. But here is Lillia overall. Once again, all ranks over the last patch, and yeah, pretty substantial CC duration increase, of course. Again, a late game focused champion, overall relatively balanced champion. Cool to see a pretty moderate sized buff. Again, this is probably going to be under 1% win rate, but cool change. Big fan. Thanks, Lillia. Next up is Nami, who gets both some QOL as well as an actual direct nerf. So the passive move speed is going to be twice as much innately, but decay over the same duration. But the AP ratio isn't going up. So her overall movement speed provided is going to be lower. That said, with an asterisk, if you were, for example, going to W and then quickly E afterwards, you go like, 90, 80, 70, 90, 80, 70, right? And that's going to be a lot more than the old version. So there's some give, some take. You didn't do a lot of W into E really quickly. Sometimes it would happen, of course. In a team fight, you were probably going to hit your buttons pretty quickly together. Again, this happens to some degree, but I would say that, it's pretty close. I guess ultimately, yeah, I'll say this is pretty close. It's going to feel pretty good. I think decaying move speed boosts and decaying slows are the best way to implement slows in League of Legends. I think, personally, I would change all of them to decaying or ramping in cases like Rammus, where it's like really, really relevant, obviously. But I actually think having an obvious tail end of an ability is actually really wise. Not even just for mermaids, but for all champions. That's a pun. Because mermaids have tails. Okay, moving on. Fins, I don't know, whatever. Anyway, Tycall's Blessing is losing 5 flat damage, and that's the nerf here. So here is the move speed passive. Now, this is actually rolling in some kind of expected ability power, which is why it's red instead of yellow and just being the exact same number. But if you are perfectly, wait until it ends and layering and wait until it ends and layering, and you did that as well in the previous version of Nami, then, you're providing a little bit less distance traveled. Not a ton, right? Like, this isn't meaningful in any way. Even when we have, like, 270 ability power, we're only providing 50 less units traveled, which is, like, not that big of a deal. It exists, right? It does matter to some degree, but it's not a ton. And then this is the total damage of her E. Again, assuming pretty moderate ability power growth, so 200 something at the very end of the game. I think 270 at a level 18 Nami. To be fair, we don't usually see level 18 Nami. So, who's going to really complain about this number? But yeah, I think if you're a level 18 Nami, you probably might have 200 something ability power, right? With the items you're going to buy. So, overall total damage of the E actually, was pretty meaningful and has now gone down somewhat. So, moderate damage nerf here. Fair enough. We have a buff to Quinn. Quinn definitely not doing all that well anymore. Gets an early game focus buff to her attack speed through W, and then a pretty hefty total AD ratio bump to the R for the amount of damage it deals just for, converting back over into human form, hopping off of Valor. So what's going on here? Well, Quinn is actually not really much of an early game champion anymore. Across all elos in top lane is only a 59% win rate champion, 50% win rate champion. 59 would be absurd. And has a very, very slight late game skew. So we flattened out a little bit with early game W attack speed. W max first is definitely her best build. I don't believe it will change based on this. I believe it will remain W max. So that's going to be pretty reasonable. A bit more attack speed overall. Once you trigger W, once you trigger the mark, then you get more attack speed. Off you go. Cool. Your attack speed is actually quite high, of course. And then overall, our damage is going to be up 75% because that's how 40 becoming 70 is going to work. And it actually becomes, half decent damage as time goes on, when she gets more and more attack damage. So, a bit more of a reasonable button to press. Helps her burst people. Seems pretty reasonable. Seems pretty decent. All right, next up is Senna, who definitely is doing a bit too well after the patch. Now, worth noting that the primary winner here is Senna as the farming bot laner. So the souls that drop from things that she kills, instead of being 10%, is 2.7% chance to spawn a Mist Wraith. I'm not sure why it's a multiple or a derivative of 9, quotient of 9, right? It's 2 and 7/9%. I'm not sure exactly why. I know that minions tend to come in multiples of 3, right? It's 6 minions in wave 1, 6 minions in wave 2. Obviously, eventually you get cannons, and then it's 7 per wave, so then it's never exactly that. But whatever, it doesn't really matter too much. Anyway, the calculator says 1 soul every 6 waves, so congrats on that one. Now, one thing I saw that people were saying glibly on the internet is like, it seems like Riot doesn't know what they want to do with Senna. And I think that's really asinine, because it doesn't, I think, even pretend to want to think about how game design works. So I know I've talked about this a lot on the patch rundown, but I'm still going to attack this point that was made by anonymous jerks on the internet. So there's the idea of balance levers, right? You can have an idea of what the champion's supposed to be and where the numbers should lie. Right? Like, oh, I think, this champion should do really well if the Q does 300 damage. And I think that, this champion should really have 4% attack speed growth or whatever. You can think what you want the champion to feel like. But at the end of the day, the game is played as the game is played, right? People are going to identify new builds. People are going to identify synergies. People are going to identify play styles. And at the end of the day, you must now balance your champion. Everything you change is, right? Everything you do to balance a champion, and champions must be balanced, is a change from whatever the champion was when it was first coming out. That, there are no, sacred numbers here where they're not allowed to change anymore unless they're really, really core to champion identity, right? If it's core to the champion identity that, like, Senna gains attack range by getting souls, that's not going to go away. And lo and behold, it hasn't gone away. If it's, core to the champion identity that Tristana, like, gets rocket jump resets and gets to jump in and out and constantly be, like, absolutely absurd, that's core to the identity. That hasn't gone away. In fact, there's more of it now because it resets off of getting a 4-stack explosive charge. The percent chance you get a soul from a minion you kill is not sacred. That's a tuning lever. That is there to be changed. Explicitly, it's there so that it can be changed. Like, this isn't the sacred part of the champion. It's there explicitly to say, hey, by the way, we have a number we can change that's going to affect the AD carry versus support balance. Because they want Senna to be balanced at AD carry and support. And so what's sacred and what's not? What can we change? What can't we? Soul drop rate from minis you kill is absolutely changeable to get those in line. And I find that patently absurd that, like, someone screenshots the, like, patch note history on the League Wiki and goes like, Riot Design doesn't know what they're doing. Pick a number already, which, like, fully flies in the face of how game balance actually works. Almost no numbers should ever be set in stone. I think it's ridiculous. Anyway, I like flaming people who say really stupid things, so off we go. Next up, Twisted Fate is going to be getting quite a bit weaker. Definitely a big pro play pick. And I actually was part of the discussion. I will say that I can take at least partial credit for this change. Not full credit, but partial credit. So Wildcard's damage is going down by 0 to 20, but going up with AP ratio. This is going to tend to nerf his early game a little bit. Okay, it's all going to be in the same target, in the same. So wait for a second. So this is going to be nerfed until you get more ability power. Now, what's interesting is this actually technically makes it a little bit more. It nerfs the early game, which is a little bit pro focused, and nerfs some early wave clear, which is a bit pro focused, but it also puts more power into the hands of people who buy ability power. Now, there's two things that happens here, right? So the first one is, again, pros are better at farming. Pros have more CS. Pros have more gold. Pros can get more use out of a buffed AP ratio. So that's true. But another thing is true, which is there is, I think it's a growing trend, but Winrate suggests this is, like, just accurate to do. Lichbane for solo queue is a better item than Rapid Fire Cannon. Now, I understand that pros may have their own needs and desires, and they may never get off RFC. I understand that. However, for solo queue, if you want to play TF, just play Lichbane second. You're going to ult on top of the AD carry anyway. They're not getting out anyway. You're still going to gold card them anyway. And your damage output matters. Your damage to turrets matters. Your team fight damage matters. Your damage matters, so just build a Lichbane. And so now, if it's a pro Twisted Fate and, random you playing solo Twisted Fate, you have Lichbane second, the pro is Rapid Fire Cannon second. You do more damage than the pro because you have Lichbane, but also you have more ability power than the pro because you have Lichbane, which means your Q does more damage than the pro because you have Lichbane. And so this actually further, kind of like, it basically hurts the RFC second build more than it hurts a more solo queue-esque build, which would help get TF to a spot where he's okay in solo queue and okay in pro. And if it's just that pros identify they want to play a different build entirely, and we can kind of balance TF around Rapid Fire Cannon and a solo queue build, and he's actually a balanced champion in solo queue and not a certain pro, that's a dub, right? That's a huge dub if they can have that one happen. But obviously we have champions like Ryze and Azir and Twisted Fate, whose win rates are trash and are 100% pick ban in pro, right? Old versions of Ryze and Azir. And that's exciting, right? To get there. So I think this is a really cool change for that reason. I think it's really, really neat. Now, the partial credit here is Stacked Deck, where I mentioned this, and I didn't see a change list about Stacked Deck until I mentioned this, so I thought it was a pretty smart change. Where I was like, hey, by the way, Stacked Deck's rank up incentive is really poor. The attack speed goes from 20 to 40%, and the base damage of the ability goes from like 60 to 80. Or something like that. So like the rank up on E isn't very big as well. So E is really, really front loaded as a 1-point wonder, which means we can nerf and TF maxes E last, right? And since we know early game is pro skewed, late game is solo queue skewed, especially lower elo skewed, and pros learn E at rank 1, and only like 40% of solo queue players learn E at rank 1. We could do a lot of heavy lifting win rate wise by being like, okay, well, we can make learning E at level 1 a little bit less correct, and that could also help push the champion balance. Now, I wanted to see this go 10 to 50, so that, theoretically, level 17 and 18, you could have a higher bonus attack speed, like ADTF, if you wanted to exist, could be a little bit stronger, possibly, but I think they're like, no, we're going for as low risk as possible, which is totally reasonable. But anyway, this ended up being the change where they nerfed early rank stack deck attack speed. So here is our big data table. So, Twisted Fate, looking at the Q, it takes 400 AP to buff Q damage. Obviously, at level 1 and 2, when it's the same base damage, you just actually do more because you have a Dark Seal or something. But it's now a pretty aggressive AP ratio of 314, so TF now has good AP ratios on his Q. Before, right, it was a lower ratio and a higher base, so it was in the 400s instead. Now it's actually a pretty generous AP ratio, not absurd, but like on the strong side. And again, it takes 400 AP to buff, which is still going to be like 3 or 4 items for TFQ to actually be stronger than it was before. That's going to be a while, to be clear. But here is Twisted Fate's attacks per second before and after. You can see he basically, 8% less total attack speed for a large portion of the game. Obviously, like around here, we're picking up Rapid Fire Cannon if you're doing the pro play build. And then, of course, by level 18 is the same champion. But right, we have pretty much definitively nerfed Twisted Fate at all points in time. And I want to point out, by the way, that this is using the expected ability power of a non-RFC build. Like if you are going Lichbane second and avoid staff third or whatever, this is the numbers you're actually looking at with a Lichbane build. So, I mean, to be fair, like this did nerf Solo Q. Solo Q TF did get weaker. This is like not for debate. This definitely happened. But pro play got nerfed by more. Fair enough. All right, and as we can see, we have win rates. 48% win rate. Solo queue champion, early game. Not even early game, which is interesting. That pros are actually working around a weak early game, and just they want to play TF because global pressure is good. And this is the problem, right? Here's a 48% win rate champion who doesn't even have early game skew, who is still a pro play problem because globals theoretically are a pro play problem, or does pros really believe TF is good? Like, one thing I want to reiterate, because I've said this several times in patch rundowns, is pro players are really, really, really feel-based. And I know teams have analysts who do actual math and do actual comparisons, say, hey, here's a better build for you. Hey, this is actually a better look. Come on, this is smarter stuff. But pros are really, really feel-based. Back in 2017, before we got into full Ardent Sensor meta, we were in an attack speed AD carry meta where everyone was rushing Blade of the Ruin King first item on Kog'Maw, on Varus, on champions like this. And for solo queue, the data overwhelmingly suggested that Rageblade first was far, far, far stronger. And I remember bringing this up to pro players in the LCS. Because this wasn't just an LCS phenomenon, everyone in the world was doing it this way. And I remember bringing it up to the two pro players in the LCS, like, hey, have you considered Rageblade first? It's a lot more damage than Blade of the Ruin King. And they're like, nah, it's probably not any good. Like, you need lifesteal too much. You need lifesteal in order to lane well. So I don't think you can really get away with going for that. Now, mind you, this is the time people would like rush Infinity Edge first item, and they were fine with it. So, pros aren't that smart. And then by the end of the year, they're like, oh, actually, we rush Rageblade first item. Pros are really, really feel-based. Alphari, famously, refused to get off Design Sunder or Gangplank. Now, when you Q a barrel, it does 1.5x base AD. When you have a Triforce you Q a barrel, it does 2.0x base AD. Every Q should be at barrels at every point in time when playing Gangplank. You get nothing. You get nothing from Divine Sunderer. But Alphari, the best laning top laner the West has ever seen, couldn't be bothered to build the right mythic item. This isn't hard. This isn't hard to get right. And so pros are really, really feel-based. It feels like it's so hard to deal with TF. Like, they just ult a side lane and just, well, you can't play side lanes. You have to pick it or ban it. It's just too good. I mean, maybe that's true. But, the champion does something really noticeable that's a bit frustrating, which is you just get ganked on side lanes all the time. Oh, do you want to play for top lane? Too bad, TF ulted you. Now, TF's going to print his team 450 gold every time he gets that gank off, but he's also a mage with 80 ability power at 3 items when he went, Everfrost, Rapid Fire Cannon, and Zhonya's, and he's got a lot of utility, and your mid laner does like 200 damage per second, which is low, by the way. So, what are we getting out of this? Because we decided to, we're basically just playing roaming Jan at this point. We're basically just saying, we're actually running Smite mid. We have no early game landing phase at all. We're going to get out CS by everybody, basically. We're gonna give lane. We're gonna go out there and we're gonna give someone else some gold, like I'm playing Smite Flash Janna. And then we go to late game and I'm like, well, I'm Janna. I don't do any damage, so enjoy your one stun. I'm out. Bye. I don't know. Again, I'm not saying TF is actually bad. I'm just saying that pros are really good at being like, this feels strong. And then they don't actually measure the results of the games that are being, of what's actually happening. So just saying. That exists kind of a lot. All right. Next up, we have changes to Zeri. Zeri is definitely doing far too well. Now, this one I graphed differently. Instead of looking at all 12.2, I looked at the last 7 days as of yesterday afternoon. So her base move speed is down by 5. Her full charge basic attack passive spell is down 0 to 5% max health damage. Her R damage is going to be down by 0 to 10. But that damage can now critically strike, which means that you can get some of it back by critting. And so what's going on here with Zeri? Well, this is all ranks last 7 days, relatively balanced, although early game skewed with a Triforce build. And so what this is, by the way, these numbers are, this is if you're doing like a standard, just, bonus AD build. This is against a squishy who just has like 555 to 2000 health. And this is against someone who's getting a bunch of bonus health and ends at around 4000. So you can see the damage nerf is obviously a bit bigger against tankier targets because, of course, the more health they have, the more percent health damage matters. But you can see here, with an ability that has a base damage of 200, the heavy lifting in all these cases is being done by the percent health damage. So most of the damage that's being nerfed, pretty meaningful stuff here. Definitely a pretty big damage drop to the ultimate. Now worth noting, that is a late game damage drop on the ultimate. So her late game's getting weaker. So she's going to be even more early game skewed as a champion, which can be fine. Just mentioning that's what's happening. So here is Zeri's R damage. Now, of course, at rank 1, it's the same ability. But again, the late game is what's getting nerfed here. So that Trinity Force Zeri is going to fall off more of a cliff and more of a cliff and more of a cliff. And overall, the damage of a full Q hitting plus the R damage on a primary target is going down 2 to eventually about 3% with a relatively normal build. I'm not counting Triforce procs in this one. Close enough. This is the damage assuming everything crits. Now, it's a little bit weird to look at this because... so technically, the percent damage lost in a crit build actually got a bit worse since I believe the baseline 10 to 30 damage on Q doesn't crit, but her total AD does. And if the lightning fully crits, that means we've got this little 10 to 50, we've got this little 10 to 30 damage that isn't affected by nerfs. Or changes in any way, but, a larger portion of her crit budget is down. Now, again, this is by the tune of 0.1%. Don't worry about it. But essentially, you can kind of see here that, if you don't want to be at 239 damage, you can be at 396 damage by, if your Q crits, it does as much more damage. Anyway, yeah, I don't know. I'm not explaining it very well, and I realize it's probably not going to make a lot of sense the way I'm saying it. Theoretically, this change should push her toward crit builds because you have more of your damage can crit. I think that should definitely still be true. So it seems pretty reasonable there. What other possible thing they could do with Zeri, just like spitballing random stuff, is that since her Q is capped at 1.5 attacks per second, her bruiser builds don't buy much attack speed, but her attack speed builds do, her crit builds do. And so if you were to lower her attack speed growth as a champion, you would make room for Kraken Slayer or Shield Bow or Phantom Dancer or whatever else to actually do heavy lifting and give you attack speed. The overcap attack speed into AD conversion could be loosened as well and made more generous. She has a lot of levers. I'm surprised we actually didn't go for a few more levers here. I think the Triforce build is definitely still going to be her best by far. But this does close the gap a very small amount. Just would like to see more, to be honest. Some bug fixes, cool stuff. All right. Now we move on to the cool part, which is an item update, which I think is really, really neat. So fighter items, mythics and legendaries got updated. So Divine Sunderer, 100 less health, 5 more AD. Gore Drinker, 150 less health, 10 more AD. Trinity Force, 100 more health, strict buff. So let's compare the mythics. So first we're going to compare Divine Sunderer to Trinity Force as they are the two Sheen items, and we're going to go from there. Old versus new, the efficiency technically went down a little bit, considering 5 AD is not worth 100 health. The item went down 92 gold of efficiency. So Divine Sunderer is ostensibly a weaker item. It does a bit more damage, of course, but it's certainly a bit less tanky. Fair enough. I mean, you still get the healing from the Sheen proc and whatnot, but worth noting. we compare it to Trinity Force, and Trinity Force just has more stats on it, right? It has a very similar amount of attack damage, right? The 35 didn't change, so I guess Divine Center has 5 more AD, but they have the same health because Triforce got buffed. They have the same haste because they all do, but also has 30% attack speed on it. So Triforce just got a whole lot stronger by gaining 100 health, gaining a whole bunch of efficiency, and being a lot stronger item, right? You kind of compare these items before, they were within 200 gold. Now they're 575 gold apart in efficiency. This will do a lot to shift people toward Trinity Force, because why wouldn't it, right? The calculus here got changed by a ton. If you want to strike with the irons hot, get on Triforce. This item got absurd. Now you could argue, well, okay, threefold strike got nerfed a little bit. Yeah, sure, okay, fine. If we lose 10 AD, right, by 30% base AD becoming 20% base AD, okay, fair. 10 AD compared to 100 health, like that's fairly close in efficiency. Arguably, a nerf. The argument there, though, is the fact that you have to still stack up to it. But, okay, you could kind of debate that this got a little bit weaker. I think it's pretty unlikely to make that case really strongly. But, okay, it's a little bit closer than maybe, at first glance on paper. And the other minor thing I want to point out is I'm a big fan of consistency in items and they being more easily compared. And so the thing I want to bring up is the fact that the attack damage is theoretically higher on Divine Sunderer, except that threefold strike is very quickly going to overtake it. I mean, Triforce already tells you it is the long duration team fight thing. It gives you attack speed for, for example. So this seems pretty reliable to say, hey, technically this is, different cost, right? Efficiency is slightly different. You are paying a bit more for this item, but by a pretty trivial amount. But essentially, you are going to land, a couple of these base AD attacks. You are going to overtake Divine Sunderer. One of the places where it feels like a lower tooltip actually, kind of lines up pretty well. Now, the Gore Drinker changes. Of course, Stridebreaker had no change at all, but we can compare it to Gore Drinker. Gore Drinker, once again, gained 10 AD, lost 150 health. That is a loss in efficiency overall. Still an incredibly efficient item. Now, Thirsting Slash, of course, is very, very, very strong as well. 135% of your base AD, heals you for 25% AD, plus 10% missing health. It's a pretty big heal. It's a very strong item. Went down 50 gold efficiency. Not a big deal. Not a big change. Stridebreaker, of course, got no change at all. Worth noting that Stridebreaker, you can, again, compare these items pretty closely together. And it's like, okay, same health, same ability haste, very similar attack damage. Within 5 seems kind of reasonable. But one gives you attack speed, which seems pretty nice. And the other one gives you Omnivamp, which is maybe just the overall better stat. Worth noting that Stridebreaker actually giving you less attack speed than Triforce. I don't hate by any means. Triforce is a much more the consistent attack damage item. And it's not like Stridebreaker really needs the help. So again, I'm not really complaining. It's much more a bit of a burstier item, and hey, it's the item that provides a slow, so whatever. So just kind of, hey, here's your kind of comparison table for comparing these items. And again, Gore Drinker didn't really get significantly weaker. Now, I would make the argument, though, I think it's actually a pretty reasonable argument, that, as you scroll up to Gore Drinker here, that having less max health can make it harder to get a good heal off, right? The entire point of Gore Drinker's active is to take a fight. Eventually, you're going to get low, because of course you are, and then you pop the active, you get a bunch of health back. If you have a higher chance of being one shot because you have 150 less health, that is going to be a pretty big deal. That can matter quite a lot. Next up, legendary fighter items get updated. So first up, we'll just cover Death's Dance and Steric's Gauge all at once. Death's Dance is 200 gold more expensive. It now stores 30 and 10% instead of 35 and 15%, but it stores magic damage as well, not just physical damage. So also now applies to damage on shields. So apparently if you had a shield up, it would absorb and keep your shield up, but then as the shield fell, it would decay into your health bar. That is arguably a very small nerf, because theoretically you could have a shield not get fully used. This now makes your shield sometimes pop by running out of time, which that change itself is a small nerf to Death's Dance. As far as the healing itself, instead of 50% max HP, it's 175% bonus AD. And it's not just on killer assist, apparently. It's within 3 seconds of damaging them. So, right, much less likely to heal, much less likely to purge the damage, I believe. All pretty meaningful stuff. So, I mean, again, this is a nerf. This is a nerf. This is a nerf. This is a buff. What's happening with the item overall? All right, well, Death's Dance. Of course, baseline stats didn't go anywhere. It's still a relatively gold efficient item, which means if you like what it provides you, which is attack damage ability haste, and armor. And then you like defy pain or ignore pain, you're pretty solid. So what does this give us? Well, obviously we still defy whatever damage we are taking, which could be going up in some cases because we're blocking 30% of magic damage and 5% less physical. But I said, okay, if we are buying this item third, right, and we have 2,500 total max HP, which is like pretty reasonable, right? That's a 400 health mythic. That's a 400 gold, health. Stride breaker. Sterix gauge. We have like 1,700 max health. At 3 items. Base health. Then okay, yeah, we're at 2,500, and so we heal 15% of that, and we heal for 375 plus the damage stored up. 150 bonus AD is 50 AD from our mythic, 50 AD from our first item, like a Sterix gauge, and 50 AD from Death Stance. Close enough anyway. And okay, we heal for less. Now it's worth noting that the farther we go on, the more items we get, the better this is, right? Because most of the heavy lifting here, most of the heavy lifting of this 2,500 is our base health, right? It's the base health we already had as a champion, which means, it's not increasing that much from item buys. But the bonus AD is increased by every single champion. In fact, it's earned only by items. So we go to item 4, this becomes 200 bonus AD, and this goes up by another 1/3, up to, 400? We get another item, and we get, 300 health. That's 15% of 300 health, which is 45, which is meh. Right? So much less. So as time goes on, as we buy more items, Death Stance is even better as a 4th item. It's even better as a 5th item. It is more and more of a scaling item, which I think is great, right? I think it's really, really cool. And obviously the amount of damage gets healed, the amount of damage we block gets healed, which is certainly relevant as well, and is part of the conversation. And that almost certainly got buffed here. To be clear, the amount that we ignore got buffed. The amount we heal is debatable because obviously we're blocking more damage and that's part of the heal, but it applies less reliably and it's more expensive, so still seems like a decent item. So Sterix gauge, instead of giving 50 raw bonus attack damage, you gain 40% of base AD as bonus AD. Now I want to point out that means your base AD must be 125. I was like 125, and I'm like, wait a second. Yes, 125. So 125 base AD is very, very late into the game. That is really high. That's like level 15 plus. It is going to take a while for Sterix gauge to catch up to the old version of the item. Note it still provides it as bonus AD, so it's going to be the exact same thing as we had here. But this is going to be a much, much worse second item spike. The Bloodlust passive is gone. You no longer get to heal for max health over 6 seconds. That is a meaningful nerf as well. And then the shield gets a lot worse as well. If you would take damage, it would put you below 30%. You, instead of getting 100 plus 8 to 40% max health, you get just 75% of bonus health. And instead of the shield being 4 seconds long, it decays over 3.75. Massive nerf to duration, massive nerf to the amount of damage blocked, massive nerf to the amount of damage in the early game, massive nerf to the amount of regen. This is a really, really, really big change. Sterix gauge was very overpowered, very, very overpowered, and is now substantially weaker. All right, well, let's assume we are still buying it at 125 base AD, so that the health and attack damage are the same. All right, well, we lost Bloodlust. That's meaningful. And our lifeline was 100 plus 8 to 40% of max health. I'm going to assume a random midpoint of 2.5 champions and say 20%. And I'm once again going to say 2,500 max health, which is roughly what we had with Sterix gauge and, a mid-level sort of situation. Which means we blocked 20% of 2,500 is 500, plus 100 is a 600-point shield. So Sterix gauge had these stats, Bloodlust, and a 600-point shield. That held fast, held strong over the course of 4 seconds. And obviously it went up and up and up. It could gain another 500 points. It was a big team fight and everyone was hitting me, and it could be 1,100-point shield. Obviously that was a possibility here. Now Sterix gauge is just attack damage and health, and not efficient at that. However, its lifeline passive is 75% of bonus HP. Well, once again, I'm kind of considering, 300 from Mythic, 400 from the Shield here, because we definitely only have 300 from Mythic and 400 from Sterix. So it's 75% of 700 bonus health, which is 525. Okay, so again, this could late game, right, get us to 1100 or more. Does this scale harder? It does scale harder, right? Because the next 400 health item we buy is going to give us another 300-point shield, 825. The next 400 health item we buy is going to give us another 300-point shield, 1125. So this does get there, right? If we add another one, Yeah, it's cool stuff. It's pretty strong. It's looking pretty reasonable. Seems like it's a good late game item, but this is pushing, much like Death Dance, we are pushing the overall power of these fighter items toward the late game. They are more towards scaling, less toward immediate power. Not using max health, but bonus AD is pushing them more towards scaling. It also means that if you are a hyper aggro champion, right? If you went Ravenous Hydra and Trinity Force and you built Blade of the Ruin King and, you know, you're like, oh, I'm a damage champ, I'm a damage champ, I'm a damage champ. You go, wait a second, Steris Gauge. And now you're like 6th item Steris Gauge on Master Yi is actually a really, really big shield. Now, you could consider, you could make the argument that how dare Yi poach this item, but it's interesting, right? It actually opens the options up more for an attack damage champion to go Steris Gauge. Now, worth pointing out that the math on this one, this does not appear to be melee only in any way, which means, now certainly AD carries tend to have lower base AD. Kais is very low, but we saw Caitlyn's was actually quite high. Now, actually, well, I take it back. Sorry. Death Dance is the one with bonus AD. I realized I got myself backwards. Death Dance is the bonus AD one. Death Dance actually makes it a pretty reasonable poach. I even say poach. You know, it's pretty good, you know, option for range champions. Now, yeah, 10% less damage is not, you know, incredible, but, you know, somewhat realistic, somewhat possible here. And again, the healing's going to be quite nice. In the case of Steris Gauge, though, you are going to need to build health to make it happen. So you actually, so I take it back. It's the other way around. Haha, I thought it would be going to be kind of neat. Steris Gauge is basically unpoachable. Right? You must be building health items for Steris Gauge to be any good. Now, by the way, this makes it, I want to be really clear about this one. This is a Scion item. This is a Scion item. Scion players, please build this instead of Hullbreaker, or at least alongside it. This is a Scion item. Buy this item on Scion. Just saying. Next up, Maw of Malmortius is getting very heavily buffed. So 5 more AD, 5 more ability haste. The shield, instead of being 200 plus 20% max health, which, by the way, real close to old Sterix, is 200 still, but bonus AD on range. So this is what confused me in my head, because I was thinking about this change when I was talking about Sterix in the data table before. So Maw as a targeted durability item against magic damage, I mean, this is still a pretty reasonable AD ratio, is now substantially better. And so this is the item, by the way. So AD carries for a while have been like, where is my anti-mage item? MR options for AD carries suck. I agree with you. This is the item. This is the item. If you're a Rageblade user, yeah, just keep going Wit's End. It's going to work with Wit's End. It's going to be an item you're going to go for. If you're going to take a dip to go here, this is the item to go for. And you get 12% Omnivamp till the end of combat. AKA not dealing or taking damage for at least 3 seconds. This is quite strong. Huge, massive strict buffs to Maw of Malmortius. So let's compare the item. Maw of Malmortius 12.2 compared to 12.3. 2800 gold item is absurdly gold efficient. The only problem with Maw of Malmortius was that you couldn't buy it with Sterix. The item was actually quite good. It really was. It was actually a quite good item. We were seeing Corki, for example, buy it a lot in pro play because it was actually a good item. The problem was, if you were a melee fighter, you clearly just bought overpowered Sterix because this shield was dumb and this regen was dumb and the item was clearly overpowered. The fact that this shield blocked all damage, not just magic, was a very big deal. The fact that this could scale even harder, very big deal. Okay, so very absurdly gold efficient item. 55 AD, 20 haste, 50 MR, cool beans. And so what is lifeline? Oh, we did the math wrong, actually. Hold on. I mean, it doesn't matter because we did this part correctly. So this is assuming 200 plus 2.25 times 100 bonus AD. So assuming Maw is your second item and you're like Trinity Force into Maw of Malmortius, and you just have the 100 bonus AD, then, you know, it's a 425 point shield instead of a 625 point shield. But as you buy another 50 damage item, you know, aka, I don't know, pick one. Blade of the Ruin King's pretty close, right? That's another 50 on top. 2.25, or sorry, 2.25 times this is going to be what, plus 90. So another 90 points in the shield puts this up to 515. We're getting closer and getting closer and getting closer. Now, we don't immediately catch up. To be clear, Lifeline didn't really get strictly stronger. I would argue that Lifeline is not as strong of a shield as it was. But it's relatively in line with Sterix Gauge. as it was before. Again, these things got nerfed, to be fair, right? These champs are getting less tanky. But as we build more and more items, the idea of going Ma as a final slot, or maybe even Death's Dance as a final slot, when our bonus AD is quite high, these things give us 55 AD, right? And it's actually really neat how similar Death's Dance and Ma actually are. Right? We have 55 AD. It's like 55, 15, 45, 55, 20, 50. Like, these are pretty close together. Now, Death's Dance is more expensive. Ma gives you more stats. Ignore Pain is arguably a better thing than Lifeline. But, yeah, worth noting that Lifeline, but maybe weaker shield. The stats are higher. And, again, we get the Omni Vamp. So, huge buff to Ma by Mortius. Very, very big deal. This is going to be a very large nerf to mages because we're going to see a lot of Ma as well Mortius. This item is very, very, very good. And I think the idea of just being like, oh, you know what? I'm going to go, like, Trinity Force, Ma, Death's Dance. I think I just win, right? Like, there's a lot of really good fighter items here that that provide a lot of damage. Now, it's less durability in general, but there's a lot of damage here. And still some decent durability tools. So, yeah, there's a lot of really good tools to play with here for carries. And, of course, we're not done. Blade of the Rune King got buffed, 3,300 gold, so it's a bit more expensive, but the percent current health damage went up 2% flat for both melee and ranged. This is a very big deal, and it's actually a bigger deal for ranged champions. So, Rune King was functionally unpurchasable for ranged champions. The damage it dealt was simply too low. And so the math here is just simply saying, okay, assuming we are hitting someone with 1,000 current health. Oh, I just realized I had the math wrong. Right. So if they have 1,000 current health, that means I'm doing 10% of that, which is 100 damage on hit. Right? So this item costs 3,000 gold, gives me 2,400 gold worth of stats, and another 2,500 gold worth of on-hit damage became 3,000 gold worth of on-hit damage. We gained a lot of efficiency on this item. And there's a reason, by the way, that Blade of the Rune King was actually usable on melee champs before, because turns out this is actually a pretty good amount of stats, right? This is actually a pretty reasonable item. 6% current HP was trash, right? If we're doing, 60 times on-hit damage, it's like, well, I mean, we're kind of there. Like, we're kind of getting 3,900 gold worth of stats, but, like, they don't synergize with anything else we're doing because we don't crit. So there's a reason ranged weren't buying the item. Whereas now, right, if we're actually getting 8%, this is actually a pretty solid item. It's now, 4,400 gold worth of stats and is actually a pretty reasonable option. So going to 8% current HP is a really big deal for ranged champions, right? You've bumped the percent health damage by a full third. Going up to 20% for melee is a big deal as well. Yes, it's more expensive. Okay, sure. It is a bit more of a, aggro prestige kind of item, but I kind of like this a lot. This is obviously a big buff, and hey, this item has no innate durability, right? My understanding, the idea with fighters is they are the best 1v1 champs in the game, right? They 1v1 tanks, they 1v1 mages, they 1v1 marksmen, they 1v1 assassins. You should not be able to, this is my opinion, but I believe this is actually a fair opinion, no one should be able to 1v1 a fighter. That is their explicit strength. They are the kings of 1v1. They've got the tools to beat a tank with Rune King. They've got the tools to beat a mage with Ma. They've got tools to, beat an assassin with Death's Dance. They're going to beat you. The fighter wins the 1v1. The fighter with the right tools wins the 1v1. No ifs, ands, or buts. The fighter wins the 1v1. That is their explicit purpose. They are the best 1v1 champs in the game. Deal with it. However, League of Legends is a team game. League of Legends is a game with a lot of 5v5s, with a lot of commonly spawning objectives that are really worth fighting over. Stacking the dragon, stacking a baron, getting Rift Herald, killing a tower with it, fighting over the base. And so that push and pull is what is interesting. I'm going to sell myself out here. I'm of the opinion that if it's not overpowered, I like the idea of Smite Janna top, because the game is about a macro give and take. Like, my origins before I was a good League of Legends player, and in beta I was rank 1, I was a very high level Warcraft 3 player. I peaked as the top 2 player in North America. I was the best Night Elf in the Americas. I was a rather good, not full pro level Warcraft 3 player. And Warcraft 3 was a lot about macro management, because there weren't that many units to control. It was a lot about reading the map and doing cool strategies and kind of being clever. At least that's how I played the game. And so, reading the map and playing around it, playing RTS, and playing the whole kind of battlefield was what interested me about that, and it just be about League of Legends. I really like macro calls in League. I'm really interested with League macro at all times. And so the idea that, okay, the fighter wins the 1v1, but the fighter's not good in the 5-on-5, right? And this is why there's the Sterak's Gauge nerf, right? The Sterak's Gauge nerf was like, oh, well, our fighter on 2 items has a 1,000 point shield. So they have more durability than the tank who built Tank Mythic and Duranduins. Because they went Gore Drinker Sterix, they're tankier than an actual tank. They're like, no wonder everyone's built just like why are Xin Zhao, Lee Sin, and Jarvan the only tanks we see in pro play, or the only jungles we see in pro play? Because they go Gore Drinker Sterix and they're invincible. They're better tanks than actual tanks, right? No wonder we see this, right? They fill that job better. And so, well, 150 health, bam, off a Gore Drinker. Shield, bam, down off a Sterix Stage, right? That's the choice. It's like, no, you are not allowed to be a good team fighter. At least not tanky as a team fighter. If you want a team fight, you must flank, you must position well, you must choose your time. Deal with it. You're not allowed to just sit there in front line and be a real tank, right? Xin Zhao, suddenly, now he only has the ult for tankiness, and he's got nothing else, right? That's a really big deal. That matters a lot. That's really, really relevant, and I like that change. They win every 1v1. They lose the team fights. That's cool. I love that. I think it's really, really neat. So yeah, they have a ton of damage tools, but they're much, much less durable. So we've got a few more items to go over. Black Cleaver loses another 100 health. I would not have minded to see Riot like really, really try to get every item at at 300, but it doesn't really matter, right? Because like even the biggest one in Sterix is, I believe, 400 here. Yeah, Sterix is 400 health. So like it's pretty close. So okay, your Mythics have 300, Sterix is 400, Cleaver has 350. Like they're close enough together. I don't know. My brain likes to see the numbers all be the same number. I just think that's, I don't know, kind of cool. Or like, you know, have all the legendaries be the same number. I don't know. It's a really minor thing. It's not actually that important, but it's just kind of a thing that's in my head. I'm a big fan of consistency. And then bring consistency when it makes sense to do so. But whatever. I mean, either way, Black Cleaver has less health than Sterix. Sterix is clearly a tankier item than Black Cleaver. It's not a huge problem. Let's move forward. Okay, so Black Cleaver loses 100 health. It gains 5 AD, and it gains 5 ability haste. There's a chance I didn't copy this over. Okay, I did. Cool. I was actually worried about that for a second. So Black Cleaver, yeah, 100 health, 5 AD, 5 haste. What happened? Well, went from 3225 to 3258. So overall, similar gold efficiency, but less tanky, right? Only 350 bonus health. But I like this a lot because this sort of feels to me like a better positioned item. Like it feels like a really good aggressive tool. The fact that it's a 30 haste item makes it really stand out to me. So one thing that was true when the Mythic rework first came out was that basically Mythics had like 0 or 20 haste. And if they had a haste Mythic passive, it was 5 per legendary, aka up to another 20. So they had 0, 20, or 40 haste in like a full build. And then legendaries all had 0, 15, or 30. And there basically there were no 10s, there were no 20s. And I like that a lot because it meant the items could really stand out as haste items, right? Like an item just like having 10 haste dangling somewhere doesn't make it feel like a haste item. It's just like, oh, it's just got another stat out there, whatever. But if an item had 30 haste, it was like, oh, wow, this is worth 2 whole haste items, right? Like I can get a Zonia's and a Banshee's or a Cosmic Drive. And Cosmic Drive is like, bam, here's 30. And it made it really obvious, like, this is a haste item. The way that Seraph's Embrace is tuned right now, I believe makes it a 30 haste item. I could be wrong about that one, actually. But, like, ideally, right, if you're running it with all the runes, it should be a 30 haste item. Because, like the unique pass was like, hey, by the way, turn your bonus mana into ability haste. And it's like, less than Cosmic Drive, right? Like, that would kind of feel bad to me. But whatever, like, you know, got off to a different topic. So anyway, I want to say that I like the idea that, like, no, bam, this is a 30 haste item. It's a big haste item. It's an item that you care about. The haste is big. We're doing it. We're getting big haste. Because like these items need to stand out, right? Black Cleaver is like, oh no, this is like a big caster item. I think Ravenous Hydra, for example, has 20 haste on it, and I actually dislike that because it's like it's a pretty good haste item. Like I don't know. Ravenous just like feels weird to me as an item. It's like this weird Omnivamp spellcaster. I don't know. It just doesn't quite sit right with me. Maybe that's me being stupid. Either way, Ravenous Hydra is getting 5 AD. But yeah, Black Cleaver, I think, actually lands in a pretty good spot here where, you know, it's 45 AD and 30 haste, which is a pretty good offensive stat stick here. This seems pretty reasonable. This ends up being pretty similar to like the Cosmic Drive numbers and seems like a pretty solid item. Ravenous Hydra gains 5 AD. Again, ends up being very, very aggressive. Worth noting that it's possible I am overvaluing Omnivamp and it's not really 112% gold efficient. but I'm valuing Omnivamp as double the value of Lifesteal, which I think is actually pretty reasonable overall. But again, pretty powerful, aggressive stat stick. But again, dislike the fact that it's kind of encroaching on Black Cleaver. Right before this was 20 and Cleaver was 25, and it's like, right, that's so fiddly, it feels wrong. When haste feels like a stat that should be given out in chunky amounts. That's all. And that, I wish they would just pick slightly different ways to balance these items, because I'm a fan of the chunky haste differences, because it makes the items feel more distinct. I guess what I'm trying to say is you want items to feel distinct, and Cleaver being at 30 haste, whereas most other items are at 15, helps them feel distinct. That's what I'm about. All right, a couple other minor changes. Hearthbound Axe buffed by 100 gold, and Hextrigger buffed by 5 AD. So Hearthbound Axe was, by the way, an absolute garbage item. So here's Hearthbound Axe before the patch. I guess, oh, wait, no, here's Hearthbound, there we go, sorry. There's Hearthbound Axe before the patch. With the movement speed active, it was 104% gold efficient, and that was only sometimes and only if you were melee, otherwise it was a completely trash item. Now Hearthbound Axe is only a 10% gold haircut until you can trigger Nimble, so, not a garbage item. Good job, Riot. I'm glad to get the item back into a decent spot, but definitely something that wasn't worth buying otherwise. Hexdrinker buffed by a raw 5 AD is honestly, I would say, unneeded. It was already a pretty gold efficient source of stats, and also had a pretty solid shield. Obviously this wasn't called Nimble, but whatever. Shield. Yay, we did it. Cool. We're changing the copy paste. It's actually lifeline, but who cares? And now it just has it has 5 more AD, so it's very, very, very efficient. So what's interesting is Hexdrinker gets to live in a spot where Arm Guard doesn't. So this is interesting, because I remember a while back, Riot nerfed Arm Guard to where once it's fully stacked, it is barely gold efficient, to the point where Arm Guard is a trash item, and buying Arm Guard isn't worth doing. Arm Guard is absolute hot garbage. The item is terrible. You shouldn't buy Arm Guard ever. If you're buying a Zonia's Hourglass, just buy the Fiendish Codex, buy the Stopwatch. If you can not buy Arm Guard, don't buy Arm Guard. Like, buy a Control Ward, don't buy Arm Guard. That item is hot garbage. And Riot did it, my understanding, was to help try to get AD Assassins back in the pro meta, because AD Assassins were clearly played a lot in solo queue, but weren't really played in pro. And we saw a bit of Qiyana mid, we eventually saw some Qiyana jungle and some Talon jungle and whatnot. People hated Talon jungle that got nerfed out, and rightly so. Definitely a frustrating champion, but Hexdrinker gets to be good, and Arm Guard doesn't. And I'm not sure. I'm not sure what you have to move around to make this work out well, but I think Arm Guard being trash is, I think to me, was a mistake. I think ultimately, I'm sorry, but until you undertake a larger project, I don't think you're getting Zed mid back in a pro play for a while. So let solo queue players get their Arm Guards and feel good and be less frustrated by Zed. I think that would be a positive, right? Let mages buy their armor items and feel better against Yone and Yasuo and Zed, because anecdotally it seems like AD mid laners are the highest ban rate ones and are the most frustrating champions. So let mages go buy their defensive tools, and I think that would help soften those concerns a bit. Just my opinion. Maybe I'm wrong about that one, but whatever. Final thing we're going to look at here is the value of upgrading from Hexdrinker to Ma, because keep in mind, Hexdrinker got strictly buffed, but of course, so did Ma. So, upgrading from Hexdrinker to Ma before gave you this. It cost you 1,500 gold, it gave you 1,700 gold worth of stats, and it gave you arguably a better lifeline. Now, this is taking the 620 lifeline shield from before, subtracting the 280 maximum possible Hexdrinker shield from before, which is kind of unrealistic. We could probably pick 200 instead. In fact, we're not going to do it. We're going to keep the max number, and so you got a 340 point lifeline shield, and this was overall a very worthwhile upgrade. We look at the new Maul Mortius, and we get the same amount of attack damage, but we get 5 more ability haste, we get the same amount of bonus MR, and the same upgrade cost, so our item got better, right? We got 121% gold efficient upgrading from Hexdrinker to Ma. Lifeline got a little bit less upgraded, sure, because Lifeline isn't quite as good as its individual thing, but certainly Ma is worth updating. And keep in mind, right, it's Ma's shield is, if I recall correctly, 200 plus 20 plus 225%. So, realistically, Ma by itself, right, this is going to be 110 plus a quarter 55 is like 12 or something, 13. So 123, so this is already like a 330 shield. Even if it's your first item, it's 330. So yeah, Ma definitely actually a pretty strong item. Seems pretty good overall. Alrighty. Yeah, I don't think I have much else to say about these items. I'm a big fan of the changes, right? Overall, the durability got weaker. Overall, the damage went up. Efficiency tended to go up a little bit as well in a lot of cases. So fighter items are stronger but less tanky. They are much more about the 1v1s. And to be fair, a lot of that is because, I want to really point this out, Steric's Gauge got really, really hit. This item got really heavily nerfed. That is the biggest thing to point out. Steric's Gauge got run over by a truck. It is probably still viable, but it is so much weaker that every fighter in the game got a lot weaker because every fighter in the game bought Steric's Gauge second. Every other buff in these patch notes is to make up for the Steric's Gauge nerf. That is a really, really big deal. Final change is Turbo Chemtank now gains 5 stacks per instance of damage dealt to, instead of damage dealt to champions large monsters, is damage taken from champions large monsters. So arguably, someone like a Poppy jungle or an Amumu jungle or a Hecarim or whatever is going to stack up faster in team fights. Someone like a Kali is not going to stack up nearly as fast. In the jungle, it's relatively close. Hecarim tends to get some attack speed. I think he runs the rune. I go Triforce, but of course, if you go Triforce, you don't have Turbo Chemtank. So it's relatively close. Obviously, if you're going Chemtank, you're not buying many attack speed items. So this is not far off, thankfully. And then, okay, your next attack deals bonus damage. Further increased against minions and monsters. Hopefully to keep it relatively balanced in that sort of situation. So I think it's a pretty smart change trying to get rid of a Kali poaching Chemtank. Patch 12.3 TLDR, we've got a slew of nerfs, an Ahri rework, and a big fighter item update. What's going on here? Ahri is overall much squishier. However, she overall heals more through her passive. It's now every 9 CS she heals, and every killer assist she heals. Overall healing is probably going to be higher, but lower baseline durability. Q damage is up about 5%, but the cost is higher. W damage is about 10% up, but the cost is lower. Charm damage is up about 15% even after removing the damage amp. What this means is if you miss Charm, all your damage is higher. If you land Charm, your damage is very close to the same. Spirit Rush now also gets resets on its duration and stacks per kill or assist, plus 1 stack, duration refreshed to 10 seconds. So overall, much more mobile, overall more damage, overall more healing, overall easier to burst. Looks like it could be quite fun, seems pretty neat. Akshan losing some early game power, 10 flat damage and 3 stack passive, as well as 15 to 0 move speed lost on canceling the second auto attack. Early game focus nerfs for an early game focus champion. Amumu loses 0.5 armor growth. Overall, not going to be a huge deal, but he is a late game scaling champion who does really, really well in low elo, so that's going to drop lower. Tantrum, this change really only affects Zeri, isn't a big deal overall. Brand now gets to get his mana back if his W one-shots casters. Pyroclasm is now better at bouncing onto enemy champions, and so it's overall going to be a little bit more consistent of a champion. I think Brand support is back. Caitlyn loses 0.4 AD growth and has 1/6 less damage on Q pass-through. Keep in mind, this does not affect hitting a trap into Q, because it's always full damage. It does not affect the first minion hit, but does lower her wave clear, does lower her late game teamfight damage output a little bit. She's already not great in solo queue, so is weak. I would recommend avoiding Caitlyn in solo queue for the most part. This might get her off of pro play. Corki has a much longer cooldown on the package. First one's now 10 minutes instead of 8, and it takes a restock every 5 instead of 4. This means you can't package into a dragon fight, and then package into a dragon team fight, and then package into a dragon team fight. You also can't package for the first Rift Herald. All things are really, really relevant. This will do a lot to get Corki out of pro play, and I think it's a really well-aimed nerf by the design team. LeBlanc loses 0-20 damage off of W. Moderate-sized nerf, that probably does a lot to get LeBlanc off of pro play. She is dead in solo queue. Lillia is a relatively balanced champion in solo queue, is getting 0.5 seconds on her sleep duration. Looks pretty good. If you like playing Lillia, play her. I think she's really, really fun. I like her a lot. Play her. Nami, overall going to be a little bit weaker. This move speed is twice as much, but decays over the duration. So overall, the same amount of distance traveled, except for the fact that the AP ratio did not get increased. So overall, going to be slightly weaker in the long run. Tide Color's Blessing, also a flat 5 damage down, is a pretty reasonable damage cut. 15 damage anytime you are trying to deal damage with a homie. Quinn gets 8% attack speed increase at level 1. Or 2 or whatever, which is pretty meaningful, and a nice 30% total AD ratio higher on the R explosion, which is going to be nice for sometimes it helps you clear the wave with your Q afterwards. It's a little bit more burst damage than the enemy champions, just some moderate damage buffs. Senna gets fewer souls as the AD carry, as that is her most overperforming role, but that means that all us Locket Senna support players out there are safe, and I'm seeing the pick rate slowly go up and up and up, so thank you, my acolytes. Locket Senna support is real strong. Twisted Fate is losing 0 to 20 damage on his Q, but gets a better AP ratio. Overall, though, until you are getting a death cap online, this is not going to give you more damage on wildcards. This is a strict nerf for all players, especially for rapid fire cannon TF players. Stack deck gets 10% to 0% less bonus attack speed, so a strict nerf at all points in time. I mean, yes, sure, at max rank E, but you had to play through the other ranks earlier, so TF is definitely much, much weaker. This probably gets him out of pro play. Zeri loses 5 move speed, which is a moderate nerf. She gets less percent health damage on the basic attack spell, which is the percent health damage is the most of the damage of that basic attack spell. So a pretty moderate damage nerf there, and 0 to 10 damage off the R. Worth noting, by the way, that Triforce Zeri is an early game spike who falls off with time. But turns out, a Triforce spike is really, 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 really strong and beats every champion when she just casts Triforce, on a 1.5 second cooldown. That's really, really good. So she spikes there. So her late game is going to get even weaker, which means that you might just play Zeri as an early game spike champion, and that's okay. Until they can get to the point where crit builds actually don't suck, it's going to be a bit to get there, I think. Then the big thing is a fighter item update. So Divine Sunderer lost 100 health and gained 5 AD. That is overall a very small nerf. Divine Sunderer lost 150 health and gained 10 AD. That is also a small nerf. Trinity Force gained 100 health, but lost 2% base AD per stack, which in certain cases is worth as much as 10 bonus AD, which at that point would be a nerf to Triforce, but it's pretty close. This is kind of a wash. So to be clear, these items got as good to maybe slightly weaker. Triforce, you could argue, is slightly stronger. It's debatable. And let's move on to the next piece, right? So fighters are slightly weaker at one item. We're going to actually skip over to Sterix Gauge. Sterix Gauge got hit very, very hard. Instead of giving you raw 50 AD, it only gives you that much AD if you have 125 base AD, which is late game. So Sterix Gauge second is going to give you a lot less attack damage. You also don't have the Bloodlust passive. You also get a lot less of a shield because 35% bonus health decaying over 3.75 is much, much weaker than this scaling shield here, which means Sterix Gauge got hit really, really hard and is gone. So item 1 got debatably weaker. Item 2 got weaker as well. In fact, Sterix is probably not your second item anymore. So what has to take up its spot? Well, Death's Dance is now an overall stronger item. The amount of healing is really close together, but it now blocks magic damage from the Ignore Pain passive, which is going to be an overall buff, even though it's 200 gold more expensive. Maw of Mortius got absurdly buffed. 5 more attack damage, 5 more ability haste. The shield is really, really close, especially later on. And Lifeline now gives Omnivamp. So absurdly large buff to Maw of Mortius. Blade of the Rune King, for just 100 gold, got 2% more current health damage on hit. That is a really, really, really big deal. That is an outstanding second item to go for. Black Cleaver gained 5 AD and 5 haste, the cost of 100 health. That is slightly up in gold efficiency, but also makes it a really obvious, aggressive item that looks really good. Ravenous Hydra gained 5 AD. So there are a bunch of much better second items that are all skewed toward damage and away from durability. Ultimately, Fighter's going to be a lot less durable, but way, way more threatening, and I am a fan of those changes. Hearthbound Axe is a little bit less garbage to buy as a component. Hexdrinker gets a little bit of a free 5 AD because it was already very good, but now it's even better. And again, it will bribe people off of Phage and off of Sterix Gauge. Turbo Chemtank gets a rework, so that now stacks when champions and large monsters hit you instead of you hit them. This is going to basically buff champions like Amumu and Poppy and Rammus, who are just tanking damage anyway. I mean, really, like, Rammus taunts, like, a Rageblade champ and just, like, 5 stacks per instant of damage. That's going to be a lot. So, yeah, going to overall be pretty solid. It only hurts people who have high attack speed and build Chemtank, so I guess Rammus storing his E to be fair, but overall going to be pretty solid. And then a bit more damage against minions and monsters in case that was going to hurt their wave clear. So yeah, seems pretty solid overall. Looks like a good patch. I'm a big fan of it. We got some fun bug fixing QOL changes, but we're not going to cover those right now. So thanks everyone very much, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.